Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We are back on the Scholars Table with another episode. On this episode, we have a special guest who is currently a DrPH candidate at the Harvard T.H School of Public Health. She's a celebrated scholar. For those of you on LinkedIn, you might have, seen the amazing work she's doing. She's a sustainable development advocate with more than 15 years of shaping policy and social change across technology, gender equity, and health. She has an extensive experience, including roles in the United Nations, UNICEF, WHO Foundation, and has contributed to developmental programs worldwide. She's also a TEDx speaker, a published author, and has been featured in many major media outlets. So let's welcome our special guest to the Scholars Table. The idea is for her to tell us about her story, her journey, and how the DrPH is shaping her career now. So let's welcome our special guest, Miss Fatou Wurie. Well, good. It's morning here. It's good morning, Fatou Wurie, and welcome to the Scholars Table.
Thank you so much for the welcome. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and I know, you've been doing a lot of incredible work, and I've seen it. I think I'm sure a lot of people have also seen it. When I was browsing through, I just Googled your name, trying to gather some small info about you, and it was so much I didn't know what to include in my introduction. So for those who don't know much about you, could you share a little bit about your personal journey, including your academic and professional journey, and what led you up to the point of doing DrPH at Harvard?
That's such a loaded question because there are so many twists and turns
Mm-hmm.
in this journey that's brought me here today. But I think fundamentally, what's really important to know about me is that I've always been committed to and really curious about equality, just from a human rights based perspective. I grew up all around the world. I was born in Sierra Leone. I left when I was 3 years old. And by the time I was 18, I had lived in over 10 to 12 countries. And I had been evacuated from countries like Yemen and Sudan at different points when there was conflict. And so what happened to me in my formative years as a young girl really was understanding really just what iniquity looks like, what inequality looks like, the effects of war, the effects of failed systems on people, and really understanding at the end of the day that regardless of where we are in the world, what country we're from, what language we speak, what our religious beliefs are, everyone should have a right to be fully seen and recognized in policy, in legislation, in everything that we do. And so that's the core of who I am, this deep, deep love for humanity. And that led me when I graduated college, I went back home to my country, which I hadn't been to in a very long time. I left
Mm-hmm.
when I was 3. I returned on my 24th birthday. And Sierra Leone was so formative for me. There's so much that I learned. But what was the natural and organic way of contributing to my country was really looking at the gender inequities, was looking at the health inequities.
Mm-hmm.
And I started working for a regional program that looked at maternal and newborn health. And I really, really loved that program because it was about bringing African experts, from doctors to policy makers and shapers, as well as researchers and advocates like myself, together to come and brainstorm and to reshape the narrative around maternal health to one that isn't around fatalism and this helplessness that women and policymakers couldn't do anything, but really that we're active agents and we can change our conditions, whether we are community leaders or we're just even women. Every member, every stakeholder mattered, and I loved that work. So just that's really the foundation of what makes me who I am in terms of what ended up shaping and pivoting me into public health. At that time, I didn't call it public health. I didn't think I was doing health equity. There weren't names like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't using those terminologies, but everything we were doing um, to really power and change systems, health systems, community systems, funding systems for and with women across the continent so that they could survive childbirth, so
Mm-hmm.
that babies were alive, was really from an equity perspective. What are the barriers that we had to account for and really take into consideration when we're trying to do systems change? And that forever shaped me. I'm by no means a doctor. I don't come from a clinical background, but I have been in many rooms and delivered and helped to deliver many babies, and just to see the conditions that women experience in my own country and across the continent shaped me. So that work led me into really, I was in West Africa when the Ebola outbreak happened. And so I went from working in development and policy work, both in Sierra Leone, but continent wide, to doing emergency work and being at the front line of the Ebola response in my country.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed me fundamentally. Development work is hard and it's long and it's really hard to measure. And so is public health work. And emergencies, and seeing and being at the front line of the Ebola response, thinking about social mobilization, thinking about burial practices, thinking about the burial teams that would do the burying across the country and their experiences. I think I've experienced burying too many newborns and stillborns, and also, once again, maternity in the time of Ebola shaped me, and the gender disparities in emergencies. So I pivoted into emergency humanitarian work from there, and went on to do that at a global scale, in one of the largest multilateral agencies in the world. And so for the last 6 years before I started my DrPH, I spent a lot of time in different countries doing a lot of emergency responses. So that was from Indonesia to the Cox's Bazar, to the Syria crisis in Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for 2 years in Northeast Nigeria. Um, with just affected communities, and so that was my work for a long time. Once again, not really believing that I could do public health, but a lot of what we're doing was public health. It just did not reconcile,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then I found myself here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an amazing and inspiring story. Oftentimes, when people reach out, they automatically assume that public health is reserved for only people with a health background, or only people who are doctors or nurses or whatever. And I keep telling them that, for me, for example, the experience I've had, some of the most effective public health practitioners are not even medics, because sometimes they come in with a different perspective that doctors or those with a health background don't typically have. And I've sat in a room with lawyers, with journalists, with people with different backgrounds doing public health. So your story kind of brings up a very important aspect of public health training, that everybody can get involved in shaping policy that automatically translates to saving a lot of lives. So thank you so much for sharing with us such a wonderful journey. But I mean, we could talk about your experiences the whole day, but one of the important reasons why I wanted to talk to you and get a sense of your journey is about the DrPH experience at Harvard. And I know that sometimes most people don't appreciate that if you want to do a doctoral training in public health, you don't necessarily have to do a PhD, right? You can do a DrPH depending on your experience. So I'm glad that you're here. Let's explore that in detail. So I mean, I've listened to your story and I've read so much about your story, but for you as an individual, what has been your true motivation to kind of choose DrPH instead of, for example, a PhD or any other doctoral program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm a social scientist by training, and I didn't say that explicitly, right? Political science, gender
Mm-hmm.
studies, and worked in the policy space for a really long time. And a lot of, and like, I never saw myself. I think my embodiment as maybe growing up in Africa, being African, the way we think about health is clinician, right? Like you are a nurse, a doctor, so I didn't really see myself in doing that, but my experiences over and over again kept on bringing me to this idea that, like, the center of any emergency response, the health of any country, and
Mm-hmm.
the well-being of any country at population level, its people, and better yet, most people living in vulnerability, marginalized experiences, women, children, people with different abilities. And so I started to think, what is the best way at the highest level
Mm-hmm.
can I really think about gender equality, think about women's health conditions, and really also bring everything that I know as a policy person, as a development practitioner, to try to make an impact in the
Yeah.
health sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And the DrPH spoke the most to me because it felt like I, as a practitioner, first and foremost, it was the one place I could thrive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wherein we could get the foundational training around epidemiology, biostatistics, methods, which are very important.
Mm-hmm.
And, either you know it or you forgot it, but they bring you up to speed on that. And so I would have the framework to help me further do what I do really well as a practitioner. And that's why the doctorate, the DrPH, really spoke to me. And I think sometimes people feel like the way to, once again, it's breaking the assumption that there are very specific ways to make impact in the health
Yeah.
ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
either as a clinician or as a trained researcher with a PhD. The DrPH allows those of us that are practitioners, that come from diverse fields, but really understand our role and importance in the health ecosystem and really want to impact population health. We have an opportunity as practitioners to learn at the highest level and to think through some of the methodologies, some of the pathways, and some of the systems changes that need to happen. And that's what really drew me to this program. And in particular, Harvard, because I did look at various other programs
Mm-hmm.
in Europe and across the US. But I think why I gravitated towards Harvard the most was this leadership component.
Yeah.
I am biased. I believe that the world doesn't need more. Well, technocrats and technical skills are always needed, and
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
you have to honor that. I think the world needs better leaders, and I think that leadership is a skill, and I think leadership is a training.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
am personally committed. Before Harvard, I considered myself a leader, but I am committed to the study of leadership so that I'm really serving people from a space that can be impactful.
Yeah, and I think like you've also highlighted an incredibly powerful point, that we are at the stage where leadership dictates everything, whether in the developed world or most especially in developing countries. Most of our challenges is because of ineffective leadership. So the more we have people who are interested in really putting themselves at the forefront of leadership training, it would eventually yield more results. And as you said, and these days the training between DrPH and even PhD, the differences has kind of become smaller because they are equally DrPH people who are doing a lot of technical work. There are also PhD people who are also doing a lot of practical work. But eventually, your passion and your interest would really highlight what or where you end up. And I think you've really explained why DrPH was a better fit for you. And I know you kind of highlighted the leadership component in Harvard, but for people who are applying to different DrPH programs, being at Boston or Emory or Hopkins. I know Hopkins DrPH is mainly a hybrid kind of DrPH where most of the component is done online, is done virtually. For Harvard, why would you? I mean, apart from the brand name, why would you advise someone to apply to Harvard DrPH? In your 2 years being at Harvard, what has been some of the things that have stood out to you?
One, I'm a mid-career, professional, and I think to stop to make the decision that you're going to take 3 years, possibly 4 years of a break in your career to study is it must be carefully thought out. Like, we're not, I'm not fresh out of my undergrad. I'm not like in my 20s. I'm like life. I'm in the thick of life.
Yeah.
You're pivoting into senior management. You're rising in your career. It's a huge commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to be in a place where, yes, there's the brand name, but it was a place where there are, I think, some of the greatest minds gravitate to,
Mm-hmm.
produce research from. There's a network that, that is really incredible that I really wanted to tap into. I'm not very good at doing remote work. You have to know who you are as a person. I can't study virtually. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. I really wanted the in-person option. I also wanted to be able to tap into the various schools across Harvard, have the opportunity to go to to the business school, to the Kennedy School, to the divinity school. One of my favorite classes actually happened in the education school,
Mm-hmm.
and it intersected with me being a brand new mom and really thinking about early childhood education. And I never had thought about it before in my health work. So those were some of the reasons why I wanted to go. And the last reason is I part of this opportunity was to think. When you are unable to fully work full time in the traditional sense, and there's this huge component of full time school in your life, there are incredible moments for me in the last 2 years where I've been able to really think about my values, my passion, and my skills and their alignment. I've had the opportunity to think about what pivoting in my career may look like. I've had the opportunity to get very connected to other individuals that are very talented and have the skill sets to collaborate with on projects that matter to me. So it's been on so many levels a rewarding experience, despite the fact that, like, I'm not working the way I wish I was working. Despite the fact that, your life looks completely different, especially when you're a parent, and you're going to school and you're trying to live life. But I think these very in-person opportunities to think, to connect, to collaborate, are priceless. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, and they really reaffirm my decision and my gratitude for being accepted into this program and have the opportunity to bring a piece of the continent,
Yeah.
and our challenges and our opportunities, and to brainstorm around that in a place like Harvard.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So and for international students, one of the reasons why people oftentimes apply to a PhD, even if they are in their professional experience, they would have been more suited to a DrPH, is the issue of funding, right? They
Yeah.
know for a PhD, if you get admitted into a good program, most likely you'll be funded, right? But how is the funding mechanism at Harvard like? For an international student, are you automatically given funding for your program, stipend? How does that work?
Look, before I answer that question directly, I think that there's two things. This comparison between PhD and DrPH, their levels, like they're still opportunity for us to get clear. So a lot of people still don't understand that I'm a doctoral student,
Mm-hmm.
right? They immediately say you're a PhD student, and
Yeah.
we automatically assume that being a PhD student is a little bit higher than being
Uh-huh.
a doctoral student,
Yeah.
which is, we know the truth. I don't think that's the case in any
Mm-hmm.
way. I think that it's just it's a difference in training. And the training is with a PhD student, as you all know, is the rigor of research, like
Mm-hmm.
and a pathway into academia.
Yeah.
Whereas with us, we still get the same training, or a significant amount of training in research and methodology, yet we are able to take all of the theory and actually develop something that has more of a practical application. And like you're saying now, it's so blurry, wherein you've
Yeah.
got doctoral students who are actually, doing a lot of research. And because there are so many areas of similarities, I find it very unfortunate that from the funding area, DrPH students continue to suffer. So universities like Boston University offer full scholarship. They're one of
Yeah.
the few.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Mm-hmm.
other programs, I believe, in the US that will give you a full scholarship. They're far and few and in between. And when you look at their curriculum, I actually just think they're PhD programs. Like, this is what I actually think. I'm like, this might as well just be a PhD program. I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand a component that has more of a, but okay. But for Harvard, I got a 50% scholarship. So, but my tuition every year it's over $51,000. So, if they're paying for half of it for the first 2 years of your program, you still have to come
Yeah.
up with $51,000. Not even 51, 73 or 76 something, $78,000 of tuition. Because for the third year, you've got to pay the full $25,000 for yourself.
Wow.
And so that's challenging. And then on top of that, that's all you get. That's the only scholarship I got, was the 50% off. And then once you get in, you can apply for different grants and different opportunities, which can offset your costs. But you've got to be very on top of the
Yeah.
fellowships. You've got to
Yeah.
be very on top of
Mm-hmm.
the grants. Otherwise, but when you're declaring as an international student, because I'm not a US citizen, when you're declaring and looking for your visa, you have to prove that you have money for the 3 years of tuition, as well as your living expenses, which, if you think about your living expenses for 3 years, you're going over $150,000. And so how I have funded my education is that I have taken loans.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have as students the opportunity to take loans. So by the time I graduate, I'm going to be about $75,000 in debt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard to swallow because I don't get a stipend. I leave in debt. And sometimes the fellowships that you get, they don't go towards tuition. They go towards research. They go towards travel for your research. They go towards, just surviving, because it's so expensive in a place like Boston. So it is not an easy choice
Yeah.
to do a DrPH.
A DrPH.
You
That's true.
really have to want to do it.
Yeah, most certainly, and for the people I've spoken to who say I want to do a PhD, and I tell them, send me your CV, and they send me their CV, and all I see is practical work, and I tell them, why don't you consider DrPH? And they said, no, we can't fund it, we can't pay the fees. So it's, that obstacle is driving a lot of people to towards a field that originally they wouldn't have gone into. So as you said, I'm hoping that these programs would reconsider and then start offering some real stipend. It's also because sometimes they feel DrPH students or candidates are more of mid-career people, so they might have accumulated some amount of cash to pay their own fees, right? But I think that should have a relook. Thanks for sharing that detail. And as you said, I've had also a couple of people who have coached get into Boston, and they got at least 75% of their fees waived, and sometimes with a role that would help them also offset their stipend and all those things. So I think doing a proper research is also equally important. But if you have the means to offer, and if you have the means to pay, and you have admission to a top program like Harvard, of course, it's gonna be worth it, right? 70K, 75K, it's nothing compared to what you will get after the program, so it's all worth it. Now, I want us to look at the application process itself for DrPH. Could you walk us through, your experience at the time that you were applying for the DrPH program? That's like 2 years ago. So how was your experience like applying to a DrPH program?
For full disclosure, because it's on my LinkedIn as well, I applied twice before I got into the program. I got into the program my second application, and actually the first application, I actually put my rejection letter on LinkedIn, and I got a lot of support and just a lot of love from the community. But it was very important to show that these things are really hard.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't have much sometimes to do with whether you are deserving of it or not, or you're qualified or not. Mine literally came down to someone, my last interviewer asking me what the value of Harvard was to me at that time. And I actually didn't understand his question, because I'm like, I'm an African woman who is trying to do this work. What do you mean, what's the value of Harvard to me? But he couldn't see it. And that was the only difference. And he saw somebody else as capable. So 2 years ago, the application, in my experience, and I know it's changed this year from friends who have gotten an acceptance into the program, into this new cohort. So you would do the full through SOFAS, usual.
Yes.
You do the full application, the usual standard questionnaire, and then they would ask you to not necessarily write an essay, but to answer like 3 main questions. And then after you'd write your 3 main questions, you would write an additional letter of intent that would stipulate like who you are and all of that stuff. And then there were, for Harvard, I don't know if it's the same for Johns Hopkins, but we did 3 virtual interviews. So pre-recorded interviews. This is before you submit. So you've done like 3 questions, you've written your letter of intent, and then you do 3 2-minute interviews that you record. And then that's part of your application, and it goes through. And of course, if you have a non-US degree, you go through what's this? Do you remember what it's called? Anyway, you go through a verification,
US evaluation or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And about $100 and something. That's an additional layer on top of your application. So at the end of it, you're spending about $300, right, just to apply. So that goes in, and it goes in the 1st of December. Harvard sometimes, I think, does people a favor and gives them an extra week. I don't know if I should be saying this. Sometimes they say, oh, we're by not 3 days,
Yeah.
You just never know. You might have those 3 days, but usually it's December 1st. And then the first week of January, I got a call on both times that I applied, being notified that I was invited for an interview. So the first layer of interview is to assess. It's just to cut the first set of applicants. And I did that. I didn't know at the time this was going to happen. I'm like, I've already interviewed. I've sent 3 videos. What more do you want? But I did that first interview. Actually, it happened the first time I applied. I was in Sierra Leone. I was having a good time. I think I was like at a restaurant, and I did the interview. And then I got called for another interview. And the second interview now is really where I think anyone who gets the second interview should feel very proud of themselves. It means that all of us can get into Harvard. It's just a matter now of figuring out, who are the best people to work together. So Harvard's DrPH program, the T.H School's DrPH program, is a cohort-based learning. So what they try to do is bring different people, different profiles that they feel will learn the best from each other, will bring out the best of each other, and to journey through the DrPH program. So you really get close to that cohort, and you really you get to go through that journey with them. So they have to figure out who are the best personalities and experiences that will come together. And so that second interview is, people go back to the drawing board and they make a case for who they feel is a worthy candidate and will fit really well with other students' profiles. So the year I applied for 2021, so I'll start in 2022, I didn't get in. 2020 to start in 2021, I didn't get in. But I made the first 2 interviews. The second time I applied, I also made the two interviews, and then I got
Mm-hmm.
accepted for 2022. So that was the process. It was long. It was expensive.
Yeah.
Three, about $300. About, 4 essays, three mini video interviews, and two in-person interviews, and then the acceptance. This year I heard that they actually just did one interview, but with two people, which I don't know how that works, if it's different, but that was the rigor of my journey.
Yeah, yeah. And so you made mention that the first time it didn't quite work out, but the second time it worked out. Do you know whether there's something specific that you did differently in your second application that you think might have tilted the table, or as you said, it's mainly because it was a cohort kind of decision, and this time around you were a good fit for the cohort?
I think it might be the latter because, at the time, the person that interviewed me is a very powerful professor, by the way. He's been like Secretary of State Health or whatever. It's a very,
Mm-hmm.
very influential person in the Harvard community and in the US context, right? He's a
Mm-hmm.
powerhouse. I was very honored to meet him. But his question to me, based on my CV and my letter, was, what is the value of Harvard to you at this point in your life? What are you going to gain from this program? And clearly, the answer I gave him wasn't sufficient. He didn't think I was right for the cohort.
Yeah.
My takeaway was, are you saying I'm too qualified, or are you saying I don't know what you mean? But because in the second interview, the second year, I had left UNICEF I chose not to continue my career in Geneva, and I took up a role in as a fellow. I went from a staff member to
Mm-hmm.
a fellow at the African Development Bank in the office of the president. And so when I applied this time around, I had that experience, and I didn't even ask the president for a reference. Honestly, my
Mm-hmm.
reference was very it was just, I don't know, someone, I don't remember who.
Yeah.
Um, and so actually my profile looked stronger, right? Because I'd had more experience. And but this time I had two people who were just like, who are you? Like, because the questions are not, what do you know? They don't because they know everyone is smart. They've looked at your CV, they've looked at your transcripts, they've looked at who you are, they've looked at your social media. Like, they can get, things. But the questions that they ask is, who are you? And what can you bring to this program? And what remains, what potential remains untapped into? And the people that interviewed me this year, I felt like they saw me. I felt like they understood my hunger. I felt like they really understood my story. And this is why, for anyone that doesn't get in, I keep saying, it's not you.
Yeah.
It's who you're connecting with. It literally is that person on the other side. Do they see me? Do they understand me? And if they do, are they going to fight for me versus you, right?
Yeah.
When you go into that room to make that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's very true. There are instances where you see uh, candidates who are extremely have a extremely compelling story and a CV, and they apply one particular year, no offer. The next year they get a lot of offers. So as you said, it's not an indication that you're not good enough for the program. It's just that some of these small issues. All right. So did you consider applying to any other DrPH program, or in your research, uh, which DrPH programs were you considering?
None. I like, when I was applying for my master's, I just applied to Oxford only. I
Mm-hmm.
remember going to, at the time, a very prominent mentor, and like, this is the only school I'm applying to, and she's like, who does that? Who did they say no? And I was like, yeah, 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 it's the only school. And so for Harvard, the first year it was only Harvard I applied to, and I didn't get
Mm-hmm.
in. The second year, I started to look at the University of Toronto, because they just opened their. I think everyone should actually look at the University of Toronto.
Okay.
Um, they opened their DrPH program about 2 years ago, so it's new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that they could be more generous with funding. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. So it's also hybrid, and they have a very. It's 4 years. they make it very clear that it's 4 years. And I think a DrPH actually, for you to be truly successful, actually takes 4 years,
Oh yes.
because it took you 2 years to figure out like just your topic and what you want to
Yeah.
do. Four
Mm-hmm.
years is actually a realistic time. 3 years is really pushing it. And I feel like they have a focus on health equity in a really special way. University of Toronto is really producing some incredible work around community health, around health equity,
Mm-hmm.
around global health. So it was the one school that I really wanted to. I spoke to people, and I really interested me. So it was the school that if Harvard had said no, it was a school I wanted to go to.
Okay. Okay. So just tell us in short how you crafted your personal story. I know you have like you had tons of things to talk about, but what elements really stood out in your personal statement? How did you go about it?
I think the second time around, I wanted people to understand what was at stake for me and who they were getting, and the story really was around the fact that I'm an African woman. There are many Africans who apply, who
Mm-hmm.
comes from a very traditional society and family. I'm Muslim. I'm Fula Madinga. I'm Sierra Leonean, very small country, and for me to do the things I have done in my career, and for me to speak out the way I've spoken out, even in my country, I was a huge advocate. I would
Mm-hmm.
go on radio. I've been pushed back because of my voice.
Yeah.
Means something. It's unique to who we are. You
Yeah.
know, I come from a middle class family. It's not like we're super wealthy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there were so many things that should have made me quiet and small, and I transcended those challenges. And I've been speaking on issues that matter the most for women and girls in my country and across Africa. And they must understand that this voice matters. And I think that was really my story. And everyone, and now that I'm even in this program, another added value of this program has been really the art of crafting your personal narrative. It is the thing that can open or close a door for you. So that was how I crafted my own story, and I think I've continued to strengthen my story over time, because it's really important that the world knows who you are and what you contribute to it. It's not
Yeah.
just your achievements.
Mm.
Anyone can sit and list, "I've done this, and that. I know this, and this, and this person. This and that person has endorsed me." So many people have that, but the question that I think is really unique for the Harvard program is, who are you? What
Yeah.
drives you? And why you?
So I know like one of the hurdles, especially for international students, it's I mean for all applicants, is the interview process, and sometimes it can be really distressing, especially if you don't know what you're going up against. How was your experience with the DrPH interview at Harvard? Like, you've interviewed there for like 2 times. How was your interview experience like?
Yeah, and in total 4 times because I applied twice. Um, so for the Harvard experience, I don't know about any other program, and this is for the doctoral program, the DrPH, and not a PhD, where you have to know your research topic and speak around that from a very technical perspective, based on what I've heard. For the doctoral program at Harvard, to be honest with you, for the first interview that I did the first year I applied, I was really nervous, which is natural, and I did a lot of research about the interviewer and their topics. And I really put my eggs in trying to understand what they would be interested in versus like what I'm interested in. And when I went into the interview, to be honest, it wasn't technical. It wasn't about, it was just very, very simple questions that became very difficult to answer because I had spent so much time trying to understand the interviewer, trying to anticipate what they would ask me, that when they said, tell me about who you are and what it is that you're passionate about, I was like, yes, who I am, who am I? Like I literally said that. So I want you to so for the Harvard experience, the 4 times I've been interviewed, I've had interviewers asking me like, oh, so you're from Sierra Leone and you have there are 3 girls in your family. What is your mother like? I had no idea why they were asking about my mother, but it was part of them trying to understand the narrative of how did this African woman raise these very seemingly like feminist, progressive, like ambitious women. And so I have to talk about and my mother matters. She's the reason why I'm the way I am. So
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I understand the narrative now. Let me say it. So I think the takeaway here is that for the Harvard experience, it's really important that you know your story, who you
Mm-hmm.
are, what makes you happy, what your influences are, and what your value add is. Like, what are you going to bring to this cohort style of learning that will add value? And how will the program add value to you? And those types of questions are very introspective. They take on a different thing because they don't want to hear about your achievements. They've seen it.
You've seen it. They've read it. I promise.
They
Yeah.
they know you. They know how you're going to answer. That's why they ask you these very seemingly simple, soft questions because they're trying to get to the heart of your character, your purpose, your vision, and also like your narrative. And for many people, especially I think the parts of the world that we come from, that's not nurtured in our learning. Like if someone asks you about your mother right now, what are you going to say? You're like, I'm talking about the epidemiological da 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 da. What do you mean, my mother? But
Uh,
that the humanity I think will be very important to bring into the interview for this doctoral program.
yeah. I think you've really encapsulated it. Because if you don't, I mean, if you're going into, for example, a DRPH interview and you don't know your own story, then what's the point, right? So, and as you said, it's not a program that is as very much concentrated on research and methodology, where you have to, for example, have an idea about the kind of research your advisor is doing, or the kind of you know proposal you're coming in with. It's more about this nuanced approach, as you've said. um but before I let you go, I need you to provide some tips for our DRPH applicants and our graduate school applicants. I know you've had an experience of applying to a UK university, Oxford, and then a US university as well. What advice would you offer these applicants based on the experience you've had?
I think it's really important that you do your research. I say this in the most sincere ways. So people might be like, "Oh, she went to Oxford and Harvard because it's Oxford and Harvard," which is a third of the truth. I went to Oxford and Harvard, and thank God that I got accepted because they actually had programs that spoke to me. And so the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford University had things I actually wanted to do, and they had researchers and lecturers I wanted to work with. So what I did was really understand who was there, reached out beforehand to ask questions so they could know that I was applying, and not because I wanted them to like be, but just so they can know there's a candidate out there that's interested in what you're studying and will potentially want to be a part of it. So I think it's really important that you stay true to who you are and you find programs that speak to you. Name brand is important, and I can't lie, I'm in them, but it's about who is going to help you get to where you need to get. And sometimes they're not at Oxford, and sometimes they're not at Harvard. I think it's really important to do the work to write a really strong personal statement. I think we underestimate the power of narrative. Like, be very clear, a very nice mix of both your achievements, but also who you are and who you want to be. What are you envisioning for the world, and why are you the best person to do it? And that's a different type of thinking. And really see if you can invest in bringing people who are strong writers or people who you can bounce ideas off to help you craft your narrative. So there's the research. Let me just repeat it. One, really do your research, really know your schools, really know the kind of ways, the ways in which they talk about the program and what it is that they do, and find a professor or someone in the program that really aligns with your aspirations to really do the work to write your narrative. It's worth the investment, it's worth the time, and really get people who have other expertise to help you craft this narrative. And I think thirdly, budget for it. These things are expensive. They're expensive with your time, they're expensive with your money, they are expensive. So really come up with a budget and a timeline that can help you pace yourself so that when you're ready to pay the money, it's there. When you're ready to do the interviews, you have when we're back home, we need to have the internet and the electricity, and we need to be in the places that we're prepared to be able to handle that process. And also have a plan for, what if I don't get money? What if I don't get funded by the school? What are my alternatives? And how will I manage this? I think always have that at the back of your mind. Don't let it stop you from applying, but have it at the back of your mind, because it's important to your narrative, it's important to how you speak to the school, and it's important to also your overall budget in this process. So be very, very, very clear as to why you're applying, who you're going to reach out to, how much money you have to the application, and what you need to do to be able to get there. And then just surrender. I just want to end by saying there's only so much we can control. We really can't control for these variables of whether we get accepted or not. We really can't, for the most part, or if someone sees you or not. So there has to be an element of, once you have done everything possible to get yourself to the place where you apply, which is so brave and courageous, to get yourself accepted, which is so brave and courageous, or in the waiting to know whether you're accepted or not, you must surrender, knowing that you are talented and gifted, and you have there are other universities in this world that are calling your name, where you might even flourish, and that regardless of what happens, you are completely brilliant, and you will continue to do wonderful things regardless of where you go.
Amazing closure. But before we go, still, now you've spoken to prospective applicants. I want you to talk to early career public health professionals, who, especially from the African continent, where there seems to be a lot of obstacles, a lot of stumbling blocks from people truly practicing global health. Any piece of advice to frustrated public health professionals?
It's very easy to say, I'll give you an example that illustrates what my advice is. I see young Africans, or just young people graduating from the MPH programs here at Harvard, and some of them have the privilege, the opportunity to go into different things. Other people take a while and take some time to be able to find something, and I think they're doing it for the comforts usually of the US or whatever. And
Yeah.
it's not to find a job. But I have to say that first for me, and I think there's some people in my age and our experience, we started from, listen, grassroots. We started from, here is $250 a month, but you are doing the work. I'm not saying that has to be everyone's story, but we just didn't give up. We really cared about what we were doing. And so no job was big or small enough for us. We really cared about our community. So I've been to every village in my country. I've been to, like, I've taken on assignments that people didn't want to take because they were not in safe or exotic locations. But the learning is so rich. So
Mm-hmm.
the question, and I've also been in institutions wherein, as a young woman, I've been discriminated against, or have felt unsafe because there's hierarchies. It's not easy, and I hope times are changing, and like, I never want anyone to be in an unsafe situation. But there's a level of grit and patience that comes with this work that we just have to keep doing. Like, public health is not where you go to make money. It's not where you go to, like, it's not a glorious, like, especially when you're a practitioner and you're working
Yeah.
as a researcher in a field,
Mm-hmm.
or you're in a response, or you're in a clinical, or you're a policy. It is hard work, and it takes a toll on you, and you have to find a way to to look after yourself. But I think, and I don't know if it's going to be helpful for anyone, but just hang on. I promise you there will be a breakthrough,
Yeah.
but just continue to grow and surpass and move past the challenges. At some point, you'll be in a position that feels less tough, structurally or even career wise. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm definitely sure your story and your journey would certainly inspire a lot of people from our part of the world to let them know that not giving up, and putting in the work from day one eventually pays off. So thank you so much for your time with us. We appreciate it, and we'll continue our conversation on
Thank
LinkedIn.
you so much for inviting me. I've had so much fun. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.